Ladies and gentlemen, I've got an absolute pleasure today to talk to you about return and reintegration programs. It's been a large part of my life for the last 10 years, and I'm really excited to present this information to you today. At the start, I've got to say a big thanks to ICMPD colleagues from the Prague process for making this presentation happen. Thanks also for your faith in my ability to present to close to 100 people today. Thank you very much. So I've got a really exciting webinar on this topic to share with all of you. And I want to start by providing you with a short overview of what I'm about to speak about. This will be useful for setting the scene for what I'm going to talk about for the next 30 or 40 minutes. What you can expect from this webinar. It's important right at the outset to say that when I say return, I'm going to talk about voluntary return. And some of you I know work predominantly with forced return, but it's important for you to know that today, when I say return, I'm predominantly talking about voluntary return. So that's the first important point. The second important point is to say today we're also talking about those return programs that link with post-return assistance. So if you like, we've got two major bodies of work. The first is return programs, and the second post-return programs, and we're looking at that link between the two programs. We're also going to identify some efficiencies for what makes a good program and what makes these programs function best. And there's also going to be some time for some new perspectives as well. So I know some of you on the call today, you know a lot about return programs, you know a lot about reintegration programs, and it's my job today to introduce some new perspectives into the conversation as well, because nobody wants to hear the same boring old traditional program chat. There's got to be some time and space for new things as well. And it's got to be fun. It's got to be fun. So I've prepared a fun and informative presentation for you today. It's not just going to be me talking. Hopefully there's a few jokes and a few laughs, and we can have a great discussion at the end with some questions from you. An overview of the major points that we will discuss over the next 30 or 40 minutes. We're going to talk about what is return and reintegration assistance. And I know that some of you will say, well, why are we doing this? So it's a way of introducing the topic so that everybody's on the same page of where we're going to direct the discussion for the next 30 or 40 minutes. So what is it? The next big question is, why should we use it? Why should it be part of our migration management programs? We're also going to talk about current program features, and you're going to hear some new perspectives from me about how I've proposed that ICMPD can direct program features in a new and exciting way. We're also going to talk about major operational challenges, and I think it's a great way of saying that the discussion can't all be perfect, and it can't be talking only about good things for the program. We've got to acknowledge the challenges as well, and that brings in a good dose of reality. And then I'm hoping that you're interested in a short analysis that I'll provide on Prague process member state country programs. So I've examined all 50 programs, and I've done a short analysis, and there's some recommendations and some initiatives there to share with you as part of the discussion. Last but not least, I'm hoping while you're here is to hear about how to build better programs, which is the title of the presentation. So I'm not proposing that my points are silver bullets, but I'm going to propose some small changes that can perhaps lead to greater efficiencies for your programs. And then some conclusions, some final words from me, and the opportunity for you to ask some tough and testing questions of my knowledge. Okay, let's start, and let's start by talking about what is return and reintegration assistance. So like I said, there's a few people who are going to be on the call who already know about the topic. But for those of you who want a quick whip around on the topic, it's a simple explanation. We can break return and reintegration down into two major parts. Return assistance is easy. And so when you think about return assistance, you're thinking about what it takes, what assistance it takes to put someone on a plane or on a bus to get them home. And ordinarily you'd think about what requirements that you and I have when we board an aircraft, that you're going to need a ticket and you're going to need some kind of identification in order to travel. And that's essentially returns assistance in a nutshell. Reintegration assistance is a little more complicated because it's based on the needs of the recipient, and that can differ from country to country, and it can also differ from person to person. And usually that involves a small amount of assistance for some people, and then also a larger amount of assistance for some people, mainly based on needs, and then also the time commitments it takes to administer that assistance. So I've gone an extra step, and I've broken the assistance down into 5 major categories, and you'll see them on your screen right now. And so if you like, the first 2 dot points could be categorized as return assistance, and then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dot points could be categorized as reintegration assistance or post-return assistance. So there's a pre-departure commitment where there's an information exchange where travellers and people who need assistance to return home are given as much information as possible in order to inform their decision about return. And then there's the travel assistance itself. And then after the return journey is complete, there's the opportunity for these 3 phases of assistance. So reception assistance is on arrival assistance, usually administered at the airport. Post-return assistance is assistance administered in the days after the day of return. So, you know, maybe the first 2, 3, or 7 days after return. And reintegration assistance is something that stretches on for as long as 12 months after return, and usually involves cooperation with a trusted organisation to administer a larger body of assistance in accordance with the reintegration plan. And after all of that, you're probably wondering why I've included that acronym at the end of this slide. So AVRR, it's essential to mention AVRR at this time. It's universally the most recognised acronym on the subject and in the return and reintegration sector. And for those of you who need the long version of AVRR, it is assisted voluntary return and reintegration assistance. So essentially meaning return and reintegration assistance in one package. So now we've established what it is. It's time to talk about why it should form part of a migration management project. And there's plenty of colleagues out there who will be saying, well, yeah, I know what it is, but does it really have a role to play in migration management? And there's some member states who have had it as part of their migration management programs for decades, and some member states who are relatively new to the idea of return and reintegration assistance as part of migration management. So I've assembled some points to talk about why return and reintegration assistance would be part of the program. And so there may be political reasons why this assistance is part of migration management. There's policy narratives that are built around the inclusion of this assistance as part of a departures program. And there's those narratives that are also informing, you know, dignified and humane return methods compared to forced return. So the reason why it's included could be political. It could also be diplomatic. There's times where return and reintegration assistance is used as a bargaining chip between sending country and receiving country. And it might be part of broader international cooperation objectives as well. And those objectives are something that allow member states to demonstrate a commitment to international migration objectives as well. There's also a dimension that says that to have a well-rounded return and reintegration program, it forms a vital part of migration management as well. So you may be able to accept some of those reasons. You may be able to accept some of those reasons, and if you don't, that's fine. But what remains is a reality, and this is I guess the way that I view the migration landscape, is that the reality is that some people need assistance to return home. So I think that there will inevitably be people who want to comply with departure orders, but they need assistance to depart, and that can be a small amount of assistance, or it can be a greater amount of assistance. But I believe that there is always a reality where there is a role for some degree of return and reintegration assistance as part of a migration management program. And even if you don't accept that, even if you say, okay, Glenn, that's fine. I get the political reasons, I get the reality, but I don't accept it. And it probably means that you're an operational person. And I still think there's an operational reality for these programs. And that reality is that voluntary return is an alternative to detention and removal. Not that it responds to a threat of detention and removal, but it's available for host governments to say, well, if we're not going to detain and remove this person, there may be a way that they can self-manage their departure through a voluntary returns program, and that person may or may not be eligible for integration assistance. Moving right along. So our next stop is talking about current program features, and this is an opportunity for me to introduce my intellectual property that I've worked with ICMPD on to explain the four major components of a return and reintegration program. It's important to say at the outset that all return and reintegration programs follow a similar format, and assistance is broken down into those pre-departure stages, the travel stages, the reception assistance, and then longer reintegration assistance. My description of those four steps is called CPIM, and it's sometimes funny to hear how CPIM is translated into other languages, and it's being done right now. And sometimes the acronym sounds more dynamic in a language other than English. But let me take you through the major steps. So the major steps are compliance, planning, implementation, and monitoring. And we can examine those four steps in greater detail over the next slides. So firstly, compliance. Compliance means different things in different immigration programs. And it's important to say that when I use compliance today, I'm talking about how a program engages with an immigration caseload. So it operates on the principle that yes, there are people who need to depart certain countries, and a program needs to go and find them. And they need to find them and work out their ability to travel. And that compliance step, I think it rests on a foundation of identification and engaging a target caseload. So for a successful return program, I believe that program must work with a highly defined target caseload and inform its compliance work, and then find travellers who are best candidates for certain methods of departure, be it forced or voluntary return. So a lot of that is determined by policy settings. So some of you will be familiar with a legal framework that will sit around your migration management program, and then within that legal framework there's a policy framework as well, and the policy is what brings things to life. So although that there is the cold hard truth of the law, the policy settings are what really makes everyday sense for your officers who have to identify the target caseload and then work through the departure pathways for those particular people. When I say compliance, it also means the sharing of information about what happens next to people who are on the returns program. So for voluntary return, that means making sure that there's enough information to inform decisions about what happens next. So earlier I mentioned that component of a migration caseload that want to comply with departure orders, but need assistance to do so. And sometimes that assistance can be as simple as information about what happens next, and information about what happens once they return to their country of origin. So the first step, compliance. The second step is called planning. And this is where things start to get moving. And for the operational people on the call, this is where it really starts to get interesting. There's a key step, which is the first point on that slide. And in this step, we're determining someone's availability for travel. And it's not just, do you want to travel on a certain day? We're talking about whether or not that person can get on a plane or get on a bus, leave this country, and then be accepted in their country of origin. So identity forms a big part of determining availability to travel. And then there's other assessments that apply to people with medical ailments, for instance. And I do believe it is a universal term when I say it's a fitness to fly, or if that person is going to board a bus and return home by land, it may very well be called fitness to ride. Once availability for travel is determined, there is a selection of the pathway that person will follow. So there's a forced return pathway, voluntary return pathway, or a self-managed departure. And depending on the legal settings in your country, all three of those avenues may be available, or it might look a little different. Then the operational steps. Travel is booked, and then a decision in accordance with policy about departure and post-arrival assistance. There's also allowances for people who require particular medical assistance as well. The next step is called implementation, and this is a step that occurs on the day of travel. It involves elective transport to the airport. Some travellers will require assistance to the airport for forced returns. It will probably be in the back of an immigration car. And for voluntary returnees, it may be assistance with a taxi fare or an Uber fare to the departure airport. Some travellers will also require assistance to navigate the departing airport, and also assistance to navigate the arrival airport as well. So all of those steps are taken care of pre-departure. And then there's an assessment about the eligibility of or applicability of reception assistance. And that's what we spoke about before, that is on arrival assistance in the airport, where someone may require assistance with their bags if they've been abroad for quite some time, or they might require an onward travel allowance, so they can travel from a major capital city to an outlying city or an outlying town. And the last step in the CPIM acronym is called monitoring, and this may be of most interest to some of you because history tells us that it is very difficult to effectively evaluate these programs. And so I've listed a few options here for monitoring and evaluation. And then there's also the last point, which is my recommendation for effective monitoring. So you might choose start to finish performance. And that means from when a return process begins to when a post-return process ends. And it might be simple as saying, from this point to this point, the events in between, we will create milestones, and we will monitor how a recipient passes through those milestones and determine the effectiveness of our program. You may be interested in segmented performance, and when I say that, I mean that you might be interested in the end-to-end performance, but you may have a particular interest in post-arrival assistance or pre-departure assistance. And so it's a way of saying we understand the big picture, but we want to also focus on this one particular element because it's important to our government, for instance. You might focus on outcomes. So some of you might be familiar with the program planning tool called Program Logic. And it's a way that you can list the objectives and then you link those to outputs. And it's a very linear and very detailed way of designing a monitoring and evaluation framework. The next 2 points are traditional techniques from the sector. And no doubt some of you have heard about sustainable return. I particularly find sustainable return very, very hard to measure. Of course, there are ways where you can say, well, we're going to define sustainable return this way. And that is going to be the method for evaluating our returns. But I still struggle with it because it doesn't matter how good your program is. There's no way that you can control what happens in the country of return. So civil conflict, for instance, is a perfect example. Afghanistan is a perfect example of a country of origin that is experiencing some civil dilemmas at the moment. There is no way that a program can guarantee that person will stay in country just because it exists. There has to be another way of developing an evaluating metric or monitoring metric for the program. There's another way of measuring it, which is called effective return, and some countries use it to describe the start and finish of the return journey. And so again, it's a way of saying what's important to your government and what's important to your executive by saying if the return is effective, whatever happens after the return is something that isn't captured by the monitoring parameters. So you may like effective return. My recommendation would be to build programs that sustain engagement. And that means for returns programs, you're looking at creating program settings that maximize the number of departures. And for reintegration programs, you're looking at creating settings that present the best outcomes for recipients. So rather than focusing on sustaining return and forcing it, if you like, my emphasis is on program design by saying, okay, right, let's build great partnerships. Let's build great compliance settings. Let's find ways of sustaining engagement with the programs as opposed to measuring the number of returns or the number of months that someone stays in country. Okay, right. So the next slide talks about major operational challenges. And those challenges are good to acknowledge. It can't be perfect. The programs can't be perfect. We need to talk about the challenges as well. And at the outset, you know, it's a really easy thing to say that voluntary return is not the same as forced return. And some people don't like voluntary return because it provides too much flexibility to travellers and recipients. But that's part of the territory. The next point is a big one, and it says that return and reintegration assistance does not guarantee departure. And that's also very important to know as well, that just the mere presence of this program can't guarantee departures, and that's the voluntary nature of its format. Even the post-arrival assistance, engagement in that assistance is voluntary, and there's no way of forcing participants to be part of that particular program. Travel documents is a universal challenge, so it doesn't matter if it's forced return or voluntary return or self-managed departure. The ability to identify someone and provide them with the necessary travel document will always be a time-consuming challenge. Some people will never receive travel documents, and therefore they can't be returned. And some member states have ways to deal with that, but that will always be a challenge for travelling someone via returns program. One of the major criticisms of return and reintegration programs is that once you offer someone money as part of a return journey, it increases the opportunity to be accused of bribing that person to go home. And it's important that the program gets the balance right to say, okay, all right, well, we've acknowledged that this person requires assistance. We've made an assessment that these things are what they need for assistance, and we're going to offer allowances consummate to that. It has to be a match. It just can't be a pay-to-go program. And if you want to read more about pay-to-go, there's a sensational article that's out there by a guy called Richard Black, and he talks about pay-to-go programs and coercive returns. It's super, but it does provide a great insight about how to get the program settings right when you introduce allowances into the departure pathway. Measuring success of the program is really, really hard as well. And we touched a little bit on this on the previous slide, talking about sustained return. But it's important to work out how your program will determine its success. You can count the number of returns, you can count the number of businesses that are sponsored in the receiving country. Whichever way you do it, you have to be very, very clear about measuring the success. You can't just say, because of the mere presence of the program, we are sustaining return in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in India. It has to be more than that. Okay, all right. So it's time to talk about Prague Process member state national returns programs. And so I want to say at the outset that this isn't a serious examination of the programs. I looked at open source information that was available on the web, and I looked at whether or not there was any evidence to suggest a national program existed for all 50 member states. And I searched for AVRR, assisted return, return and reintegration, and I found a lot of information, There were some member states where I couldn't find the information, and it's important to say that even with the findings, that if I couldn't find the information, it doesn't mean that the programs don't exist. It's just a general indication of program characteristics, and we can talk about it. So first up, I thought it was fun to share what I believe to be the best websites, and I'm going to produce a policy paper for Prague Process, and I can provide the web addresses if you want to let your fingers do the walking and examine the websites. This is according to me. So I looked at ease of navigation and available information, and then also the presence of videos as well. So I think Austria has a great website. It's very, very easy to use. There's a lot of great information. The information is available in a lot of different languages. I don't know if it's a new website, but I can't remember seeing this website before. So it's really, really good. And it only beats Belgium by just a little bit. And Belgium's website has been the benchmark, well, I believe it's the benchmark of websites for a long time. It's an incredibly good website, and it has a very good way of presenting a very clear message about return and reintegration assistance. And that's been my favourite until I saw the Austrian site. And now my favourite is the Austrian site. An honourable mention goes to Bulgaria. I think the Bulgarian website is really, really good. They call it migration or migrant life. And it's very easy to navigate. It's got some excellent stories, and it provides a great summary of the national program. The Finnish website has been great for years. I think the Finns are really, really good at presenting very, very clean websites, and there's a lot of information on the site, but you wouldn't know it. It's beautifully presented, and the information is there, and it's very easy to find, and it's a great site. Rounding out the top 5, the Swiss website is really, really good because it provides some excellent videos and some excellent stories of return. Like I said, I'll provide the web addresses in a later publication, but I thought it was fun just to talk about the websites. Okay, what did I find? So it's interesting to note that 72% of Prague Process member states have a visible program. That means when I went looking, I could find evidence of an outward return and reintegration program. So I wasn't looking for an inward or a sending program, or sorry, a receiving program. I could find evidence of those in a lot of countries, but I found 36 out of 50 countries had a visible return and reintegration program. The next statistic is really interesting. So of those 36 member states, 33 of you work with IOM. And so the AVRR product is what I mentioned earlier. It's an IOM product, and there's an AVR program present in 33 of 50 member states. 3 member states self-manage a program. That means they don't work with an external organisation to get things done. And 14 member states without a visible program are all non-EU member states. I thought that was an important statistic for what I'm going to say next. So one of my major recommendations would be that there's a huge opportunity here to talk about more initiatives for Prague Process non-EU member states. And the reason is that these countries have returns caseloads too. Even though those caseloads might be small, there's a migration management program in that country, and as part of managing that program, voluntary return and reintegration assistance have a role to play. And there's the ability for ICMPD and the ability for EU member states to work with their partners and share information and insights to build those programs where it's required. So of the non-EU member states, 9 non-EU member states have visible programs. So that's great. 7 of the 9 work with IOM, good, and 2 self-manage. And when I said earlier that we might want to build a program in some of these countries, there's some of these countries that already have really, really strong programs. And so I'm not going to name the countries, but there is a very strong demonstration of compliance. There's a great program that sits in the migration management landscape to permit voluntary return and reintegration. And that some of these programs have a good ability to move volume. That means that whatever number of departures are thrown at the program, there's the ability to travel a lot of people if that's required. So I wanted to provide some recommendations also, because I don't think this is just a lecture. I think you want to hear some ideas and some insights, and I wanted to say that there's a potential here for a joint solution for non-EU Prague Process member states. The ICMPD with Prague process is perfectly positioned to lead further discussion on this topic. There's the ability to centralise some functions to achieve economies of scale, and that will provide some better return on investment for low volume caseloads. So that in a nutshell is the idea, and there's the ability for the Prague process colleagues to work with interested member states to talk further. So I don't think you're just attending the webinar to hear about pre-departure assistance or reintegration assistance. I think you want to hear what I have to say when I say how to build better programs. So here's some points that I can share that might make a difference to your programs in whichever part of the world they're in. So the first two are quite obvious. So increasing policy control, it's a hot topic because sometimes member states entrust too much responsibility on external organisations to decide how their program functions, and there may not be an immediate danger in doing that because there's a lot of knowledge there, there's a lot of working expertise, but you want to be sure that the program can do exactly what you want it to do, and you don't want an external organisation deciding how your program works. You want to decide how that works, and so it's very important in the beginning to say, okay, all right, away from that external organisation, what's the policy settings? How do we want this program to work? And then once you've decided the policy settings, you can go into how do we control the program. And so again, there may be advantages of outsourcing some of that program to an external organisation, but the best programs, they in-house some aspects of the program just to maintain that control. Some programs in some countries even say, well, if that external organisation can't achieve that departure, we'll do the departure ourselves. And that's not a forced return. That's a voluntary return of a different definition. You might increase the customised features of the program. And there are some EU member states who have done this quite well, where they've got a general program, but within that general program, they've built very, very specific programs for instance, supporting returns to Kosovo, for instance. And then there's other examples to other parts of the world. So Ethiopia is really hot at the moment. There's a lot of Ethiopian nationals who aren't having a good time abroad, and they need assistance to return home. And so customising part of the program might say, well, we've got a government objective that says we want to assist this particular nationality, and you build a customised program for that nationality. We spoke before about in-housing more program functions. In-housing is a great way of increasing control, and that would probably be my #1 recommendation for building better programs. I used to work on a national program that outsourced as good as 100% of the responsibility for its national returns program to an external organisation. And they even outsourced policy control at one stage. So bringing those functions back in-house under the control of your immigration department, under the control of your government, would be a great first step of building a better program. In the operational space, there's always the ability to seek operational alliances. And so I know those alliances are out there, and I know member states do work together to achieve returns to certain parts of the world. And those alliances are great because it provides a joint solution, a cost-saving solution. It also allows for information exchange on priority countries of return. It could also assist with the choice of service partners. And so when I say service partners, it means that if you've got to charter a plane, who charters the plane? If you've got to provide escorts, who provides the escorts? If you've got to provide post-return assistance, which organisation is your trusted partner to provide that post-return assistance. And that is also something that could form part of the next steps for ICMPD dialogue on this topic. And if all else fails, I believe a way to build a better voluntary returns program is to increase the visibility of forced returns. And this could be a contentious recommendation for the humanitarians on the call, but it's a way of saying that there's an inseparable relationship between forced and voluntary return, and a strong forced return program without doubt increases subscription to voluntary returns programs. Okay, we made it. This is the last slide before I hand back to my Prague process colleagues, and we hear some questions from you. These are my conclusions. So if you were asleep for the last 40 minutes and you're just waking up because I said this is the end, these would be my major points from the presentation. That for these programs, it's really important to have clear policy objectives. The ability to misuse these programs is very, very high. And so as a government, as a host government, it's very important to decide how you want these programs to work in practice. Once you've got clear policy objectives, it's also very important to link those policy objectives to program design. So it's no good just having those policy objectives sit in an office somewhere. They have to be visible in program work on the ground. The third point is a shout out for customized solutions. And I'm thinking about work that I did for a particular member state in the last 2 years where that member state wanted program settings that were customized for their immigration environment. So it was a way of saying that generalized programs won't work, and we want to build a program that's specifically for us. And by doing that, I think it's a great way of increasing control and delivering on a great result for government and a great result for donors as well. Last but not least, there's the benefit of joint solutions. And I do believe that there is a future for this topic, particularly with non-EU member states, those willing member states, where joint solutions can be shared between EU, non-EU. It doesn't have to be an operational alliance, but it's a way of saying this is a way that we can increase the information sharing on the topic to provide better programs and to provide better results. So Prague process colleagues, that's all I have to say as part of my presentation. To participants, thanks very much for your attention, and I'm willing to hear any questions that you might have.